This episode is brought to you by the Solent Sky Museum, preserving aviation heritage for future generations.
On the show tonight, we're talking about Spitfire the Feature Documentary, Neil Armstrong, and we've got an exclusive announcement.
Hello and welcome to the Aviators Lounge, a show all about everything to do with the world of historic aviation with me, Andy Jones, and Tony Dyer. And we're rolling out the red carpet tonight and talking about the silver screen as we're joined by film directors Anthony Palmer and David Fairhead. Welcome.
Hello, good to see you.
And once again, we're broadcasting here from the Solent Sky Museum in Southampton. And actually, we're going to start tonight with Tony's show and tell. Right, what have you brought us
I've got
tonight?
some homework for you today. This is a piece of Lancaster, which is very appertaining to today. So, watch your fingers on it, because it's not had a good life. But would you like to try and hazard a guess as to what this could possibly be?
Piece of Lancaster.
It's
Looks heavy,
not
so-
something off the Elson toilet, is it? The Lancaster hat?
Looks like it might have been in the Elson
Right.
toilet.
I'll tell you what, it
but no.
looks heavy.
I mean, it's very, very heavy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's-
Extraordinary, but I've absolutely no idea.
I'm going to cheat and look at the label.
£4.50.
No, it's a B19, of course.
That's so I put it back in the right place.
Is it related to? It's some sort of piston, isn't it? That operates. It's something that operates. Is it a bomb release?
No. You're getting close, though. Should we put them out?
Yeah,
in the
can I,
misery?
let's have a quick
Oh,
look.
right, you
Let's
better
just
have a look at
describe this. And so it's a piece of metal.
Yeah.
It's about fitting just about slightly bigger than a hand size. It's very, very heavy actually for a piece of aeroplane. As David says, it looks like it's got a piece of piston, and it looks as though you've recovered this from a crash site.
Yeah, no, it came from a dump.
It came from a dump.
But yeah,
oh, okay.
same sort of
right.
thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. Go on then, Tony.
Right.
Right.
Basically, what this is everyone's heard of Martin Baker. And this was actually designed by Martin, James Martin, who was a very well-known engineer.
Not a TV chef.
No.
No.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
forget him. Yeah. I do find it sad that when you Google his name, you come up with a chef. This item, mounted on the aircraft like this, there was at least 4 on the Lancaster Bomber. And at the time, at the early part of the war, there was lots and lots of accidents where aircraft flew into barrage balloon cables.
Right, so a barrage balloon, that goes up. That's it. There's a balloon that goes up, doesn't it? And it takes a cable with it.
That's it. The whole idea basically was if you could force the enemy bombers to fly higher, their accuracy of bombing would be worse, so they would miss. So that was the idea. The unfortunate thing with a small country like Great Britain is that you have a lot of airfields in your own aircraft, and they would accidentally fly into these. So what they did is he designed this thing. So the idea is it went on the Lancaster, it was each side of the engines. So it was
mounted on the wing.
mounted on the wing, leading edge. And the cable would go in, hit the leading edge, go in there, and set off a charge, and it would chop it.
It would cut it.
It would cut it.
So that's actually a cable cutter.
So it's a cable cutter for a barrage balloon.
Really interesting.
Yep.
Was it? I mean, you say it was prevent accidents over here, but did the
Yeah,
Germans?
Yeah, it
use?
was also had obviously abilities of being used, for bombing
'cause
raids
that's
as
something
well.
I don't often think of German barrage balloons, but is it? Yeah.
To be honest, I'm
They had a
not
big
actually.
cross on the side. Of it.
That's.
But
It's amazing.
Yeah.
You said it was found on a dump.
yes,
yeah.
yeah, but the RAF actually formed a squadron just to look at reducing the number of aircraft lost from flying into barrage balloons.
Well, I heard one of a swordfish that was a guy who was flying, and he caught a barrage balloon cable, and he was flying east. Caught the barrage balloon cable with the tip of the wing and ended up flying west. He turned around a complete 180 degrees, went round the other way and ended up flying off.
I can imagine with a slow aircraft you'd probably get away with it, but not something like a Lancaster.
It used to be my nickname at school, barrage balloon. But,
I can't think why it changed that.
right. Now we're talking about movies tonight, Tony. You've actually added a piece of movie memorabilia to your collection, which has been quite interesting. Which you've been hoiking around all over the country.
I have. Yes, I've got the nose section from a B-25 camera plane, so a Mitchell bomber, twin-engined American bomber, and they use them primarily on the Battle of Britain film, but also things like Catch-22.
Wow.
The original Catch-22, not the one that's
yes,
just come out. Yeah.
Catch-22, 633 Squadron, Mosquito
So
Squadron.
people might have seen this around at shows, mightn't they? Because you've taken it up to Cockpit Fest, we took it to Duxford.
Yeah.
And this is actually, so when you look at a B25, they've widened the front of it, and you've got that nose, but you've got the plexiglass,
Yeah,
is
it's
that right?
basically, yeah, it's a plexiglass, big Perspex dome. And if you work out in the 60s, you could probably buy a Mitchell bomber for, I don't know, £5,000 or £6,000. The plexiglass nose section that I've got cost $10,000
Wow.
to make, and they made 2 of them.
Filming Spitfires in the air.
That's it.
That's something, David and Ant, you've had a fair experience of, you haven't you? Filming Spitfires in the air. So let's move on, David, Ant. Both of you've got a background in broadcast television. You moved from the small screen to the big screen, and you now make feature documentaries. Last year, you released Spitfire, an epic, sweeping tale of determination, vision, and courage. The story of an aeroplane that was forged in competition, shaped as the war clouds gathered, and refined in the white heat of combat. That is a great, a great synopsis of the film. The film went into cinemas around the world and was a box office hit. It has a 94% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, which anyone who follows films is damn good. And it was top of the iTunes download chart for documentaries, am I right in thinking that? Any other accolades to add to that?
For quite a while, yeah. No, people just seem to like it, which is nice.
Right. Well, let's remind us, we've got the trailer here, so let's just remind ourselves of what that was all about.
We're talking about total war. There's nobody else helping us. All the continents have fallen down, and it was us against this monster. The Spitfire was built as an interceptor fighter.
These aeroplanes represent to the British people an unwillingness to be bullied.
The country couldn't possibly have too many of these fighters.
It was a design which was brilliant. You can't fly a Spitfire and forget about it. It stays with you forever.
Enemy aircraft were falling like confetti. We were cock a hoop.
You had to be very careful in landing. She was a lady in the air, but a bitch on the ground.
I looked up, and the air was filled with Germans. Had they landed, they'd have won, and the course of world history would have been changed.
We've got to always remember those who didn't come back.
This aeroplane stands for so much. Grace and gallantry. She is a symbol of freedom.
Great stuff to see that again. Now, Ant, am I right in thinking this started like so many good ideas with a conversation in the pub?
It did, unfortunately. I mean, it's like all true good ideas, isn't it? I had decided I got bored with television. David had worked a long time in feature docs and as an editor, and I just thought it'd be worthwhile picking his brains. And I sat him down on the bench in this lovely pub in Surrey and said, "What do you think about doing a feature doc about Spitfire?" David had tried to develop something fairly similar, which I think was called...
It was called Last of the Few, but with no success because we were taking the route of, going through Channel 4 and television. And there's only limited interest going for TV commissions. And when Ant said this, I knew I had a partner in crime. And so we just decided we'd make the show right there. I mean, that was basically what it was. It wasn't about trying to get the thing commissioned. We just had to start from the very beginning and raise the funds. But the first thing that we did, because we knew time was running out, as it still is, was record the interviews with the veterans.
I mean, that was the funny thing, was about 2 days after I talked to David, and his eyes had lit up. And of course, I had an interest in aviation, but not as massive as I do now. But David really did, and I realised there was a good story there. But what we realised on the Monday after meeting at the pub was, you looked at the average age of the people that were surviving, and you realised you had 18 months possibly. And we interviewed, I think, 12 surviving Spitfire pilots, I think it was, and now, today, very sadly, only 2 are alive. of those 12.
That was quite remarkable because you had the premiere of the film. You had, and within sort of a week or so, wasn't
Mary
it?
Ellis died, which was very sad.
And then you had Jeffrey Wellham and Tom Neal.
Yeah.
And you knew Tom Neal, didn't you, Tony? Yes.
He'd unveiled a memorial we put up to the only Victoria Cross of the Battle of Britain, who was Nicholson, J.B. Nicholson. We flew from Boscombe Down in a hurricane.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary story, his story.
Yeah.
Well, Tom was in his squadron, of course.
Yes,
and in fact, Nicholson was flying his Hurricane.
And that happened literally about half a mile in that direction from where we are at the moment. So yes, we'll round that story off nicely.
Amazing,
there. So how do you go about making a film about aircraft then? Do you just you can't just pitch up at an airfield and start filming? There's so much more to do that. How did you? Obviously, you went out. The veterans were key to this, so you started to hunt those down. But you've got those fantastic aerial sequences, which is kind of the one of the selling points of the film. How did you go about that process?
Well, we knew we wanted high quality aerial air-to-air footage, and that was a great challenge and hurdle. And Ant and I, we scoured YouTube for shots that we might be able to use in the trailer, and then we found a website for Christie's which had a video catalogue for a Mark I Spitfire. And it had aerial footage on it that was unlike anything we'd ever seen before, and that was shot by John Dibbs, who's a very well-known
famous name
air-to-air photographer. But the bulk of his work is magazine photography and books. But he did have a kind of commercial side in doing photographs of moving footage of aircraft for commercials and stuff. So he'd filmed Concorde for BA and things like that, but he'd never made that move into movies. And I showed it to Ant, and we said, well, he's the guy we've got to get.
And it wasn't easy, because we did email John and said we'd love to use these clips in our trailer to help raise money for the film, and there was dead silence. And we were convinced that he was like, we don't want to see you. And then eventually he called us up and said, I'm sorry, I've been very busy, but this sounds like a project I would love to be involved in. And working with somebody with that kind of experience is really important. And David and I want to tell stories effectively as filmmakers, but we knew we didn't want just the sort of bog standard air-to-air which you see. We wanted something very different. Has to tell a story, and that was a big challenge. And as everyone can imagine, air-to-air is phenomenally expensive, and to get 3 Mark I's and filmed over Bicester, David and I, that was our first major shoot, and on the morning we were told only 2 were available because one wasn't working. And the guy that was coordinating came up to us and said, you've got a choice, we're under so much pressure, you take 2 or you could wait for 3. And David and I both said, what's the point of 2?
Right.
We want 3. And all it was the gun sight had been left on overnight, the light and the batteries flat. So when we were standing on the control tower at Bicester and those 3 Mark I's flew in, I think both of us were quite emotional because we realised the film, we'd started to achieve what we hoped for, our dream of making this story.
Well, it's more than an aircraft, isn't it?
Oh yeah, totally. And I mean, that's what got me into it, was that when I saw this Spitfire, and I'd seen them, but I suddenly realised that the history, the emotion, the stories behind it, and I felt there had to be something, as we both did, there had to be something to tell about this aircraft that was unique, and its unique contribution to our history.
Well, so many people also, told us when we would started off, oh, there's been loads of films about Spitfires. I've seen, we had a little, we'd go to Legends. For 3 years we went to Legends. We had a little video monitor inside a marquee, and we were saying to people, come on, have a look at our Spitfire trailer. Oh, I've seen them all, mate. Seen them all. Yeah. And we had a silent disco set up with headphones because we didn't want those noisy airplanes to drown out our lovely soundtrack. And I remember one guy came in and he was, seen them all. And I said, come on, have a look, it's only 2 minutes. Oh, all right. He put the headphones on and looked at it. And it was like somebody had hit him on the head with a mallet. And he took them off and said, that's amazing.
But also there was another guy that came in and again said, no, I'm too busy, I've seen it all. He watched it and he just held his arm up and all hairs on his arm had gone
Wow.
up. And he was saying, nothing does that to me. So I think we felt we had something, but it's because what we wanted to tell was the story of the aircraft, but also the universal themes of, you know, all the tragedy that surrounded, you know, the youth of the fighter pilots, the emotion, all of that, and everything that that plane represents. So it's very difficult. Part of the problem for David and I is that when we sat down one day in my garage with a huge wall and started putting up every single card for every single story, you realise that you can't tell every aspect. And that was one thing that we realised very early on. People said, well, I hope you're going to tell that story, and I hope you're going to tell that story. And we thought, actually, as filmmakers, you've got to be true to your vision, and you just got to say, I'm sorry, that's our version of what the film's about. So.
Yeah. Well, I think you struck the balance because it is more than just an aircraft. Everyone, or most people, have a Spitfire story, whether it's someone who built them, flew with them, tinkered with them, saw them. It's quite amazing, and I think you struck the right balance. And a big thing for me on the film is the human history, the human story. You know, it's like if you take any feature of the war and say X thousand people died, it's a number. When you take one person and you take their story, it's so much more, and I think you've done that.
Well, thank you very much. Well, you know, one of the stories that really chimed with both of us actually, but when we were editing it, was Tom Neal's story about his flight to Malta, which of course is in a Hurricane, not a Spitfire. Damn. But you know, we'd taken the decision that you know, they were pilots, they did the same job. It actually didn't matter what plane they were flying. But that story of getting lost on the way to Malta, losing the escort, and that moment of incredible revelation where he's prayed. And suddenly it is literally the clouds part, and there's the wake of the convoy. I found, I mean, when we put that together for the first time, it was kind of not a dry eye in the cutting room.
And what was interesting about that is that when we showed it to people, it was, oh, this is the most amazing story. And then we went through this very difficult bit where we tested the film to an audience, very general audience, and some people came up and said, oh, why is that story in the film? It's not all about the Spitfire. And we did. For a short while, only a week or so, that story was removed. But you then realise actually be brave. You know, these are human characters who have extraordinary stories to tell. And I think, you know, we were very lucky to meet, say, Geoffrey Wellham, who actually on the day of our interview clearly had forgotten that he was going to be interviewed. But he said, oh, come in. But what was amazing is I always remember vividly sitting, and I was filming, David was directing, we were under a lot of pressure, just the two of us, all the way down in Cornwall. And he said, the peak of my whole life was then. And then it all went down. And I hadn't thought about this. And on the way home, I remember talking to David about this. It must have been amazing at his age as a young fighter pilot. And that was probably quite similar for a lot of those young fighter pilots.
Yes, I've certainly seen actually interviews with some of the few in the sort of the 1980s. I think Bob Doe used to run a petrol station or something down in Sussex somewhere. You know, and quite
Stanford Tucker potato farm.
Something that went to kind of menial jobs afterwards. Remarkable. Well, since Spitfire, David, you've had a second film out, which is Armstrong, profile of astronaut Neil Armstrong. And something I'd not been aware of, stupidly really, was that Neil Armstrong had a prolific career as a pilot before NASA and joined NASA, didn't he?
Well, he was an aviator.
He
probably liked lounging around as well.
Yes. But, nice pun in there, that's great.
One person who didn't lounge around, I should imagine, was Neil. He was a pretty driven person. No, I've had the good fortune to work on quite a few films about the Apollo program, and so this was an opportunity to tell Neil's story in time for the 50th anniversary of the moon landings. And when we talked about it as a production team, my real feeling was that Neil described himself as an aviator. He wasn't an astronaut, was just one of the things he did, but he was an aviator. Right. And he started off aged, he started learning to fly at 14. He did Saturday jobs and cut the grass at the airport in order to finance his flying lessons. And he got his license age 16 before he could drive. He then wanted to go to university to study engineering. his family couldn't afford to send him to university, so he joined a program the US Navy had, which they still do it today, here, but they'll finance your journey through university if you then serve in the Navy as it was then. And so, but unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever way you look at it, the Korean War came along, and he became a fighter pilot. And that was, and from after coming back from Korea, he finished his degree, and then the way it looks is he just walked into a job in flight testing. It wasn't. I don't think it was quite that easy, but
I was going to say, Tony, your career into flight test engineering, you've not quite made it onto the shuttle yet, have you?
No, unfortunately not.
Well, that's because we didn't have a shuttle program, unfortunately. But so our Cape Canaveral was on the Isle of Wight.
Yes,
doesn't have quite the same glamour, does it?
Yeah.
But no. So and then from he joined the NACA, which is I can't remember what the initials stand for, but it was the predecessor to NASA. And within a few short years, he found himself at Edwards Air Force Base, which was the Mecca, flight test Mecca. And from there, he made it to being one of the sort of dozen or so pilots who flew the X-15. And the X-15 is probably the most extraordinary rocket-powered aircraft that's ever flown. It flew up to, I think it was 60 miles high, edge of space. It was dropped from a B-52 and then flew up to the edge of space. And in fact, the pilots who flew it up there qualified as astronauts. Yeah. So he's double qualified as an astronaut.
Well, we've got the trailer here. Let's just have a look at this.
One seat, and in it was a fellow named Neil Armstrong. Now, why was that?
Neil Armstrong from Wapakoneta, Ohio? He's got to be the guy. When we started evaluating his skill, that made him kind of head and shoulders above the rest.
Neil flew the X-15. If you could get in that program, that was the best, right?
Did I have anything to do with Neil being the first man on the moon? Yes, I did it.
The media labeled my father as a recluse.
Thank God social media didn't exist back then.
There were things that he just couldn't say no to.
He just wanted to be a regular guy, just like everybody else.
Looking back, I didn't get to spend the amount of time with my family I would have liked.
Just the thought of a human being on another heavenly body was just overwhelming.
A guy that was used to putting his life on the line every time he flew.
I can remember thinking, my God, we're there.
When are you going to take the first woman to the moon?
We welcome you with open arms.
For one priceless moment, all the people on this earth are truly one.
It may have been a small step, but it was taken by a giant of a man.
Excellent to see. And of course, you've got Harrison Ford to do some of the narration as well.
Yeah.
Who's a vintage aircraft pilot himself?
He is indeed.
if he lands on the right runway.
In fact, I gave him a copy of Spitfire to watch when I went out to record the voiceover with him. So he's a very nice chap.
Oh, good stuff. Good stuff. Did you get a trip in the Millennium Falcon? Or
I did. It was just being refueled at the time. Yeah.
Wonderful. Now, the big announcement tonight from you chaps is you're working together again.
We are, yes.
Spitfire couldn't have been that bad.
No, it wasn't that bad. Once the lawyers got involved, I think we're happy.
And you're moving from one Merlin engine to 4 Merlin engines.
Yep.
And what's the subject of the next project?
I would be tempted to say Cessna, but it's not. As much as people do want a film about Cessna, we are going to be doing a film called Lancaster, which many people will be familiar with. And it is, in many respects, a far bigger, more epic story than Spitfire. And it's quite challenging for us to make it, isn't it, because of that.
I mean, lots of people, I know that lots of people have come up to you and said you should be making films on this aeroplane,
Yes.
and that aeroplane,
Yes, they
and
do,
all
yeah.
this kind. Why have you gone for Lancaster specifically?
Well, actually, it was David was very keen to do Lancaster. In fact, I think at one point you were keen to probably do Lancaster before Spitfire, I don't know, but...
Well, no, always Spitfire was always first. And now looking back on it, funnily enough, you know, all the pain of making a film, it goes away. It's like childbirth. So I'm told.
So you're told from experience.
Allegedly.
But no, so Spitfire is an icon. It's about defending our freedom, the White Cliffs, all that kind of stuff. And it's, when you think of it now, well, blimey, that was an easy sell, wasn't it? But Lancaster is different. It's a much darker story. It's it's about what it takes to win a war, and that is a much harder thing to think about, because there is controversy around that still to this day, 75 years on, and we need to tell that story. And I think the biggest thing for us is that, we've interviewed 35 Bomber Command veterans already, which is absolutely amazing. We did 12, as Ant mentioned, for Spitfire. And for us, the thing is that what they did in the service of their country, they were ordered to do it, even though they were volunteers to a person. You can't imagine having to go through that. And what we want to do is to put the audience back in the context of that time, to understand why that bomber offensive happened. We're not trying to defend the bombing of Dresden, but we're trying to ask people to understand why it took place, and the extraordinary bravery of these, the young aircrew, average aged 21, who went through that. And just as with Spitfire, the Lancaster is the vehicle by which we will tell these incredible stories.
It's very easy for, modern people to have revisionist views.
Yes.
And we were never there.
No.
So
I mean, Johnny Johnson said in his interview to us, which was fantastic, was he has little time for retrospective historians, and he turns to them and he says, were you actually there? Were you personally aware of the facts? And if not, shut your bloody mouth. And I remember filming that, and but this is the point. You cannot possibly question what these guys went through. I mean, I think what's also very different about this story is, with a fighter pilot, single guy up, fighting, back down again. This story, which is extraordinary, 7 guys climbing into an aircraft.
It's a crew, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. And they're not just doing half an hour, but doing 4 hours plus. And the stories that we've come across in the 33 have been really extraordinary.
There's extra camaraderie part to it, isn't it? Because with the fighter pilots, if you like, you've got them meeting in the pub and things like that, but they were never really as a crew.
No.
Sharing everything.
One of my favourite bits, we ask, we prepare all the questions individually when we go to do the interviews, but there are certain questions that we ask all of them, and one of them is, how was your crew formed? And the RAF had this extraordinary enlightened way of forming crews, and they would take a couple of hundred people, all with certain roles, pilots, navigators, gunners, navigators, bomb aimers, and they'd put them in a hangar and they'd say, form your own crew. And it's a bit like, choosing football teams at school, I should imagine. But they would do that. And it was unusual for crews not to work. And they very often would just click immediately, and from that moment on, they were inseparable. But the funny thing is, as one of our interviewees, Peter Kelsey, said, they came to the end of their tour. A tour was 30 operations, and they were lucky. They were lucky to survive. If they survived the first five, then they had a chance of survival. But you could still be lost on your last op very, very easily. But he said they finished their last op. They climbed out of the aircraft. They shook hands, and they never saw each other again.
Wow.
It's quite sad, really.
It is. It's very sad, and lots of these guys, had really difficult times, being shot down, taken prisoner of war. There was one guy, David Fraser, who we interviewed, who was 99, and we got lost on the way to finding him. I knocked on the door, and David opened the door, and I said, "Excuse me, we're looking for David Fraser." He was 99 years old. He looked like he was about 60, this guy. And he delivered this very powerful interview, and sadly David died 3-4 weeks ago. But he talks about, he was shot down, wasn't he?
He was a rear gunner in a Wellington. He was shot down in May 1941, so really at the very beginning of the bombing campaign. And but he does tell this fantastic story about parachuting down, and he landed in a field of cows. And he thought, well, I'll hide here. And the cows all gathered round him because they were interested, and then he just got bored. So the cows all wandered off, and he thought, well, maybe I'll go and knock on the door of that house over there. So he walked over there, knocked on the door. This door opened, and there's a German soldier there, and it was actually the barracks for the searchlight battery.
Oh no!
Anyway, they took him in there, and they fed him and everything, and then when the Fafa police came to collect him and take him away. By this time, they'd had a few drinks and all the rest of it, and he got on really well with them. And they were all saying, "Oh, Hitler will be marching up London in the Whitehall pretty soon." And he said, "Well, just wait and see, wait and see." And they were all laughing, "Wait and see, wait and see." They thought it was hilarious, but of course, they did wait and see, and look what happened. The bomber command came back.
Did he not also mention, which I thought was so lovely, is the Germans looked at him because he was so young and said, are they employing schoolboys now? So we've come across a lot of amazing stories.
Well, we've got a little teaser here, actually, that you've kindly let us show. So let's have a look at this then.
Fought my war from 5 miles up. I dropped, I think it was at one time, it was 7 or 8 or 9 tons of incendiaries on somewhere. Came back, had my breakfast, had a good output before the booze the next day, thought nothing of it. It was totally another world. But I realised that what I had done was fundamentally wrong. But the circumstances were such that we did it. And I can't reconcile those two viewpoints. I can't reconcile them. Because I don't think anybody's in a position to reconcile them until they've been there.
A pet version of mine is what I call retrospective historians. Even now, if I met one, I'd ask them just 2 questions. Were you there? Were you personally aware of the circumstances and conditions at that time? The answer to both those questions is no, so keep your bloody mouth shut.
Flames below, lighting up sky, and of course the searchlights weaving around would light up aircraft as they whistled past, so you could see other aircraft, and you could certainly see them being shot down. We saw several being shot down and going down in flames, and you'd sometimes see parachutes coming out, sometimes you didn't, and we all saw them, and our attitude was, it's not our turn tonight. You sympathise, you're sorry to see them go, but your attitude is, well, it's not our turn. Might be tomorrow night, but it's not our turn tonight. It's strange, isn't it, that sort of feeling we had.
It's such a different tone, isn't it, to Spitfire?
Yeah, I think it's the interesting thing is obviously it was when we could strike back. I was going to say Empire Strikes Back, but you know, it was really a case where Britain and the Commonwealth had stood alone for quite some time, and then suddenly you've got the bombing of here and Southampton all around us, and London and up the north and Liverpool and everywhere. Really bad bombing, and then suddenly it was the case where finally the war was being taken to the Germans.
Well, that's right. I mean, if you want to take the Bomber Command story back further, it's really interesting that it was possibly the intervention of Bomber Command bombing Berlin in response to an accidental bombing of London that precipitated Hitler changing plans and stopped bombing the airfields and bombed London. Yeah. And perhaps that was what won the Battle of Britain. So maybe Bomber Command won the Battle of Britain.
We're on that note. Next week. On that note, I think we better wrap things up here. That sounds like you're getting a bit contentious here, but great. Excellent. Right, how do we see Spitfire? It's available on DVD and Blu-ray?
It is indeed, and readily available, I think, everywhere.
Yeah, HMV.
Yeah.
There's still a branch near
and you can it's on streaming services as well. Yes,
it is. Yep, it's very easy to find.
The same with Armstrong as well.
Armstrong is available. Wonderful. All good streaming services and online shops.
Good stuff. And how are we going to follow your story with Lancaster with what you do?
Well, we have literally. So this is the first announcement we've made on Aviators Lounge. It's very exciting. We've got a Facebook page which is Lancaster the Feature Documentary.
Great.
Because obviously there's a lot of other Lancaster interest groups out there.
Yes.
And we will be updating people as our progress. There's a lot more filming to do, but that's how people can follow our filming progress.
Well, we'd like to keep in touch with you on that and see how it's going.
Yeah,
and looking forward to seeing that next year, hopefully. Great. Excellent. Right. Well, thank you, David. Thank you, Anthony and Tony. And as always, if you have any stories of interest, then please do get in contact with us. Remember to subscribe to this channel and podcast. Thank you and goodbye. I love that stony silence.
This episode was brought to you by the Solent Sky Museum, preserving aviation heritage for future generations.